You ever wonder why some people can take one small step, just one, and somehow turn it into unstoppable progress, while others take 10 steps and still feel stuck? It's not luck. It's not talent. It's not some magical gift. It's momentum. And momentum is a science. It's predictable. It's repeatable. And once you understand it, you become a force in your own life instead of a passenger waiting for something to happen. Because there's a moment, maybe you felt it, when you push yourself just a little further than you thought you could. You make a call you've been avoiding. You take an action you've been postponing. You choose courage over comfort just once. And that one tiny action creates a shift inside your mind, inside your nervous system, inside your identity. It's the point where the old you starts losing power and the new you starts waking up. That's the science of momentum. It starts microscopic, but it grows almost instantly the moment you commit. Most people think they need confidence to take action. They think they need clarity first. They think they need motivation. That's why they stay stuck. Because motivation doesn't create momentum. Action does. And I'm talking about the smallest action, the kind that doesn't even feel significant. Science calls it activation energy. I call it the spark, the ignition, the moment where you stop negotiating with your limitations and decide to move no matter what. And once you move, something beautiful happens. Your brain releases dopamine, not because you succeeded, because you acted. Your body starts rewarding you for progress. Your identity begins to shift from I hope to I am. And the more you move, the more the chemistry stacks in your favor. You start building a psychological snowball. Every action reinforces the belief that you're capable. Every win, no matter how tiny, starts compounding. This is how momentum is built, not by giant leaps, but by stacking small victories until they become undeniable proof of who you're becoming. But here's the trap: people lose momentum because they forget what they're moving toward. They don't have a target that excites them, scares them, or awakens something in them. Momentum dies in the absence of meaning. You need a vision worth moving for, worth sweating for, worth fighting for. Something that makes you lean forward instead of retreating. Something that pulls you instead of you constantly pushing. So ask yourself right now, what's the vision that would pull you? What's the standard you're done negotiating with? What's the life you know you're meant to step into if you stop waiting for the perfect moment and created momentum instead? Because momentum isn't emotional, it's mechanical. You don't need to feel good to start. You don't need permission. You don't need certainty. You just need movement. Movement creates clarity. Movement creates motivation. Movement creates power. When you take action, even imperfect action, you send a signal to your nervous system, we're doing this, and that signal lights up everything. Your focus sharpens. Your energy rises. Your inner strength, the part of you that's been dormant, begins to roar back to life. You've had moments in your life where you were unstoppable. Maybe you forgot them, but they're still inside you. Moments where you didn't overthink, you acted. Moments where something inside you said now. That version of you didn't disappear, you just stopped feeding it. Momentum is how you bring it back, not through pressure. Through consistent movement, through the decision to show up again and again until something inside you shifts permanently. And when it does, when that shift happens, you don't just change your habits, you change your identity. You stop being someone who tries and you start being someone who executes, someone who follows through, someone who builds energy instead of waiting for it, someone who doesn't need external motivation because the momentum within them becomes their fire. Momentum is the bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. And once you build it, once you feel that unstoppable force pulling you forward, life starts opening doors you never even knew existed. Opportunities appear. People show up. Your confidence rises. Not because the world changed, because you changed the pace at which you move through it. The science is simple: you move, you grow. You stay still, you shrink. So this is your moment, your spark, your ignition point, the place where the old story loses its grip and a new chapter begins. All it takes is one decision, one action, one step that becomes the first drop of momentum, and then everything starts to accelerate. Momentum begins with a single decisive action that shifts your identity and ignites unstoppable progress. Most people underestimate the power of that one moment, that one decision, because it feels too small to matter. They think change requires dramatic transformation, a huge breakthrough, a perfect plan, or the right timing. But the truth is, every breakthrough in life starts long before anyone sees the results. It begins internally with a shift so subtle that the world doesn't even notice it, yet it becomes the seed of everything that follows. That single action becomes the line you draw between who you've been and who you're becoming. And once you cross that line, something fundamental inside you changes. When you choose to take that first step, even while you're uncertain or afraid, you interrupt the old patterns that held you in place. You disrupt the inertia of doubt, hesitation, and overthinking. Your nervous system recognizes that something different is happening, and it responds instantly. You feel a spark, a little burst of aliveness, because you're stepping into movement rather than staying stuck in the cycle of delay. That shift creates psychological leverage. You're no longer negotiating with limitations. You're confronting them with action. And action, even the smallest action, sends a powerful message to your brain. We are capable, we are willing, we are moving. The moment you move, you begin changing your internal chemistry. Your brain releases dopamine not because you've achieved something massive, but because you've created progress. That progress becomes a reward system that fuels the next action. And suddenly, what felt impossible a moment earlier becomes accessible. The fear that held you back loses its intensity. The doubt that whispered in your ear starts to fade. You begin awakening a part of yourself that's been dormant. Your drive, your hunger, your belief that you can shape your life rather than just survive it. This is where identity shifts begin. Not through affirmations or external validation, but through the lived experience of choosing to act. One decision can become a turning point because it forces you to redefine how you see yourself. Instead of identifying as someone who waits, you become someone who initiates. Instead of identifying as someone who needs clarity, you become someone who creates clarity through movement. Instead of identifying as someone who reacts, you become someone who builds momentum through deliberate choices. Identity is shaped by repeated behavior, yes, but it is sparked by a single moment where you decide to align with the future you instead of the limitations of the past. That first action also creates a sense of internal congruence. You feel yourself stepping into integrity with the person you know you're meant to be. You stop betraying your own standards. You stop shrinking to fit the fears that once felt bigger than your vision. You start recognizing that confidence doesn't come before movement, it is born from movement. Each step you take reinforces the belief that you can take the next one. And as your identity expands, the actions that once felt heavy begin to feel natural, even automatic. That is the early spark of unstoppable progress. People often believe their life will change when conditions improve, when they feel ready, or when inspiration strikes. But momentum doesn't come from ideal circumstances. It comes from initiating movement when nothing around you says you should. It comes from choosing courage in the absence of certainty. It comes from refusing to wait for permission from the world and instead giving yourself permission to begin. That moment of beginning becomes the foundation for everything that follows. It's the point where you take back control of your direction, your energy, and your potential. When you make that single decisive action, you don't just change what you do, you change the direction of your life. You shift your story from one of hesitation to one of determination. You create a pattern that your future self will build upon. You establish momentum not as an emotional state, but as a habit, a discipline, a way of moving through the world. And once that mindset is activated, once that identity shift begins, you become the kind of person who doesn't wait for life to happen, but steps forward and creates the next chapter through consistent, conscious movement. Momentum begins in that small, seemingly insignificant moment when you choose action over avoidance, courage over comfort, and alignment over hesitation. And that single choice becomes the spark that ignites everything to come. Small, consistent wins compound into a powerful force that transforms who you are and what you believe is possible. Every person who has ever achieved anything extraordinary didn't begin with a giant leap. They began with one small action repeated over and over until it gained weight, speed, and meaning. Those small wins act like psychological anchors. They ground you in proof. Proof that you can follow through, proof that you can change, proof that progress is happening even when the results aren't visible yet. When you commit to the process of taking small, steady actions, you begin creating a pattern of progress that starts shaping your identity from the inside out. Most people underestimate the impact of small wins because they're conditioned to look for dramatic transformation. They want overnight success. They want instant confidence. They want to skip the messy middle and go straight to mastery. But the human nervous system doesn't change through big events. It changes through repetition. Each small win signals to your brain that you're capable. It builds trust with yourself. And that trust becomes the emotional foundation for bigger risks, bigger actions, and bigger leaps. You stop hoping you can change and start knowing you can because you have evidence, even if it's small. The compounding effect of small wins works the same way nature works. A seed doesn't break the ground by forcing itself upward in one explosive moment. It grows quietly and consistently beneath the surface, building strength until one day it emerges. By the time anyone sees the breakthrough, the real growth has already happened. That's how momentum works. That's how confidence works. That's how transformation happens. It's built in the quiet moments of discipline, the days when no one is watching, the decisions you make when it feels like your actions aren't making a difference, but they are. They're stacking, they're layering, they're building the invisible momentum that eventually becomes visible progress. Every small action you take rewires your nervous system. When you show up for yourself, your brain begins associating effort with reward. You start releasing dopamine, not from achieving the final result, but from completing the step right in front of you. This chemistry shift isn't just motivational, it's biological reinforcement. You teach your mind and body to crave progress. And when progress becomes something you enjoy rather than something you fear, everything changes. You stop resisting the work. You stop overthinking. You stop hesitating. You begin moving with a different level of certainty because the process itself becomes energizing. Those small wins also become the building blocks of your identity. The more you follow through on the things you promise yourself, the more your inner dialogue shifts from doubt to possibility. Instead of thinking, I don't know if I can do this, you begin thinking, I've done it before, and I can do it again. Instead of focusing on how far you have to go, you start recognizing how far you've already come. Instead of being overwhelmed by the size of the dream, you become empowered by the size of each step you've taken. Identity isn't changed by big moments. It's changed by accumulated evidence. And small wins provide that evidence every single day. People often ask why they lose motivation or why they feel stuck even when they have big goals. It's because they've placed all their emotional weight on the final outcome instead of creating momentum through small, attainable victories. When you make your progress dependent on reaching the finish line, you deprive yourself of the fuel needed to get there. But when you break your journey into small, meaningful steps and celebrate each one, you build energy instead of draining it. That energy compounds, that belief compounds, that confidence compounds. And with each small win, the next step feels easier, lighter, more aligned. Small, consistent wins also protect you from burnout. When your progress is manageable and realistic, you don't feel overwhelmed by the enormity of your goals. You move forward with clarity rather than pressure. You stay disciplined without forcing yourself through exhaustion. You create a rhythm that's sustainable. Momentum isn't about intensity, it's about consistency. It's not about doing everything in one moment. It's about doing something every day that reinforces your direction. What's beautiful about small wins is that they eventually create a tipping point. You reach a moment where the accumulation of tiny victories becomes undeniable. At that point, your actions no longer feel like effort. They feel like who you are. You don't need motivation because you've built a system. You don't need to hype yourself up because you've trained your identity to follow through. You don't depend on perfect conditions because you've learned to create progress under any conditions. That's when small wins evolve into massive transformation. When you consistently stack these wins, you become a different person. Not because someone changed you, not because life suddenly became easier, but because you built yourself through disciplined action, repeated effort, and the willingness to show up even when it didn't feel significant. Over time, those small steps become a powerful momentum that shifts your belief system, your self-image, and the possibilities you allow yourself to pursue.